Hey everyone, it's your host Mike, and welcome back to our little corner of the internet where the eerie meets the everyday. Today, I've got a tale that might just make you rethink your interior decor, or at least what you consider art. This story comes from a friend of mine, let's call her Linda, whose life took a surreal twist straight out of a psychological thriller. Linda's husband Daniel could best be described as an eccentric, not the kind that collects taxidermy or insists on wearing Victorian clothing in the 21st century, but rather the kind who thinks splashing paint on a canvas in the most haphazard manner possible qualifies as high art. Daniel was an artist, or at least that's the term he loftily ascribed to himself. His style? Think Jackson Pollock, but less methodical and more chaotic. His tools of choice weren't brushes but buckets, not palettes but paint cans hurled across the room in fits of creativity or something akin to a toddler's tantrum. Weirdly enough, these chaotic messes of paint sold for thousands of dollars. Daniel's artworks, resembling the aftermath of a paint factory explosion, were highly sought after by what Linda called the moneyed and the mindless. The clientele was an amusing parade of characters. They were the type who wore turtlenecks in summer, discussed the use of negative space over expensive wine, and nodded thoughtfully while saying nothing of substance. Linda never quite understood the appeal. She often joked that her toddler could achieve the same effect with ketchup and mustard during a lunchtime mishap. Her bewildering journey began in earnest, while Daniel was away, visiting his dear old mother, probably the only person who understood him less than Linda. With Daniel out of town, Linda took the helm of his downtown studio, a space that screamed modern art with its high ceilings, inexplicable sculptures, and of course, walls adorned with Daniel's paint-splattered canvases. One particular evening, she found herself alone in the studio, waiting for a client who was fashionably late, as they often are when trying to appear important. Her only company was the hum of the city outside and the rows of chaotic canvases inside. As fate would have it, her iPad chose that moment to die, a modern tragedy, leaving her without her usual digital escape. With nothing better to do, Linda began to wander among the paintings. It was then, glasses off and vision blurred, that a particular piece caught her eye. A dark canvas called Midnight Whisper stood out. What was typically a mess of black and navy splatters now took on a new form, a silhouette that eerily resembled a figure looming over a sleeping person. "Must be the lighting," Linda muttered to herself, adjusting the glasses on her nose. But curiosity, once piqued, isn't easily satisfied. She removed her glasses again, squinting at another painting, Crimson Echo. To her amusement and growing horror, the splatters here seemed to outline a hand dripping with blood. Creepy, she thought, chuckling nervously to herself, but convinced it was all in her head. But the real test came when she laid eyes on Silent Scream. She had always disliked this particular swirl of grays and muted yellows. It was as if the colors themselves were having a dreary day. Now, from a distance, the center of the painting morphed into what looked unmistakably like a woman's face, mouth agape, as if frozen in a scream. The humor of the situation wasn't lost on Linda. Her husband's ugly art was now turning into a gallery of macabre nightmares. "That's it," she decided, her voice echoing slightly in the empty studio. "If this art gig doesn't work out, we could always start a haunted house." Little did she know, her light-hearted joke would soon take on a darker reality as she delved deeper into the mystery of Daniel's chaotic canvases. As the evening drew on, Linda's client still hadn't shown up. In this modern world of instant communication, where a text message could travel faster than a New York minute, the absence of even a cursory "running late, so sorry" was both an affront and a mystery. Meanwhile, Linda, left to her own devices, turned her attention back to the disturbing revelations of Daniel's abstract monstrosities. The gallery's overhead lights cast long shadows, turning the splatters on the canvases into a macabre dance of shapes and shades. Linda, having already unearthed a sleeping figure and a bloody hand from the chaos, decided to dive deeper into the rabbit hole. She told herself it was just the thrill of the hunt, the same kind of feeling one might get from solving a particularly gruesome crossword puzzle in the Sunday paper. Next up was Whispers in the Dark, a canvas awash with what looked like an explosion in a charcoal factory. She squinted at it from various angles, half expecting to see a rendition of The Last Supper, or perhaps Elvis having a cup of coffee. Instead, to her dismay and fascination, the random splashes coalesced into the distinct shape of a hunched figure, possibly whispering secrets or plotting the downfall of wallpaper. "It's like a magic eye picture," she mused aloud, "except it's all doom and gloom instead of a scooter or a dolphin." The client still hadn't arrived, and the silence of the studio was beginning to feel oppressive, like a thick velvet curtain smothering any trace of normalcy. Linda's attempts to rationalize the images as products of her overactive imagination were failing miserably. After all, how many accidental portraits of ominous figures could one man create before it became a calling card? Her curiosity now turning into a kind of obsessive compulsion, Linda pulled out a painting titled Eclipse of the Heart. At first glance, and really, at second and third glance too, it was nothing more than a chaotic mess of reds and blacks, as if the canvas had been a witness to a particularly violent argument between a bottle of ketchup and a vat of tar. But as she stared, her vision blurry, the colors bled into each other, forming what looked like a heart. Not the cutesy Valentine's kind, but an anatomical beating heart, enveloped by creeping shadows. "Great," Linda scoffed, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Daniel's paintings are turning into an anatomy quiz for goths." With each new discovery, the studio shrank around her, the walls inching closer, as if they were as curious as she was about what lay hidden in the next piece. She approached a canvas titled Veil of Tears, already bracing herself for what horror might reveal itself this time. This painting was dominated by a wash of blue and gray, streaked with violent bursts of silver, like tears cried by the sky during a particularly traumatic storm. As she removed her glasses once again, the abstract marks shimmered and shifted, the vague outline of a face materializing from the chaos, its features twisted in sorrow or pain. Linda couldn't help but let out a half laugh, half sob. "Daniel, what on earth are you trying to communicate? An ode to seasonal allergies?" By now, the humor she found in the situation was tinged with unease. Each painting seemed less like a product of random creativity and more like a window into a troubled soul, specifically her husband's. But what did it mean? And more importantly, was she ready to face the implications? The door to the studio creaked open, snapping her out of her reverie. Finally, the client, or perhaps, as Linda now wondered with a shiver, the curator of Daniel's eerie gallery, had arrived. With the client finally arriving, Linda momentarily shelved her burgeoning career as a detective in the macabre arts. She greeted the latecomer with a plastered smile that was as fake as a $3 bill and offered the usual pleasantries that she imagined people exchanged at such eerie occasions. Something about the weather and traffic, those universal scapegoats. But as the client, a well-dressed gentleman with the air of someone who found the concept of time to be beneath him, wandered around the gallery, Linda's mind was not on sales pitches. Instead, it raced with thoughts of the hidden images in Daniel's paintings. The silence of the gallery was now punctuated by the man's occasional hums of approval and the distant echo of Linda's concerns bouncing around in her head. Once the client had made his selection, a particularly dreary piece called Abyssal Lament that looked like the underbelly of a depressed octopus, Linda was left alone again with the remaining canvases. Her curiosity, now fully ignited like a campfire doused in gasoline, could not be left unattended. She turned her attention to a piece named Nocturnal Whispers. At first, it looked as if someone had taken a joyride across the canvas with a scooter dipped in black and purple paint. But as Linda's eyes adjusted, and she squinted just right, the chaos converged into the form of an owl. Not a regular wise old owl, mind you, but one that looked as if it had seen too much, its eyes wide and haunted. "What have you been up to, Daniel?" she muttered to herself. "Starting a nocturnal wildlife series for the paranormally inclined?" Her laughter at her own joke was a brief respite from the growing unease. She couldn't deny the thrill that came with each new grotesque discovery, of feeling uncomfortably close to watching a horror movie through spread fingers. You want to look away, but you just can't. Encouraged, or perhaps ensnared, by her own curiosity, Linda moved to the next painting, Gossamer Vale. This one was lighter, mostly whites and grays that swirled together like morning mist. Finally, something less nightmarish, she thought, relieved. Yet, as the details blurred with her fading focus, the mist seemed to form the silhouette of a face, mouth agape as if caught in a silent scream. The relief was short-lived. Or not, she sighed. It's just a foggy day in Screamville. The gallery, once a sanctuary of artistic expression, now felt more like a stage for a ghostly play, each painting an act in a spectral drama. Linda half expected the paintings to start whispering amongst themselves, critiquing her inability to appreciate the deeper meanings in their eerie depictions. She had one last canvas to confront, Reflections of the Id. It was darker than the others, imbued with deep reds and shadowy contours that played tricks on the eyes. As she stared, the abstract shapes coalesced into something resembling a human heart, encased in what could only be described as shadowy tendrils. "Ah, the heart of darkness, quite literally," she quipped, her humor tinged with sarcasm. Linda was torn between admiration for Daniel's unintentional genius in creating a horror art gallery and a rising dread about what these paintings might reveal about his psyche. Was he merely an artist with a flair for the dramatic? Or was there something darker at play? As she pondered these questions, the gallery's lights flickered ominously, a cliché in any horror setting, but utterly chilling in her current predicament. With a deep breath, she decided it was time to dig even deeper into the mystery of the paintings, but not before checking that the gallery's doors were securely locked. After all, one can never be too careful when surrounded by a collection of artistic nightmares. As the gallery's lights steadied themselves, Linda took it as a sign either to continue her exploration or to run for the hills. However, curiosity proved stronger than caution, and she couldn't help but feel like a protagonist in one of those horror movies, where you shout at the screen, "Don't go into the basement!" And yet, here she was, metaphorically heading downstairs, armed with nothing but a shaky flashlight of skepticism and a suit of irony. After locking the door, because safety first, even in the face of spectral art, Linda approached the next canvas with the trepidation of a cat approaching a suspiciously rustling bush. The painting, ominously titled Echoes of the Void, was as cheerful as a tax audit notice. At first glance, it was just a morass of black and gray swirls, like a television tuned to a dead channel in a thunderstorm. But as Linda's eyes adjusted, the swirls began to morph into what looked suspiciously like a face, its expression twisted in torment, or perhaps extreme constipation. "Great," Linda muttered to herself. Daniel's art has now officially moved from Pollock-inspired horror to Munch-level nightmare fuel. She chuckled, but the sound was hollow in the empty gallery. It was one thing to joke about the eerie images, quite another to face them alone in a room that felt increasingly like a gateway to another, much less pleasant dimension. The next painting was waiting, its presence looming like a cloud over a picnic. Whispering Madness was a cacophony of reds and oranges, intersecting and battling across the canvas like the world's most passive-aggressive game of tic-tac-toe. Squinting, the colors bled into one another, revealing what might have been a horde of demons having a rather fiery debate. "Probably discussing the finer points of existential dread," Linda quipped, the edge of her humor sharpened by nerves. Her laugh was a brief interruption to the oppressive silence of the gallery, which seemed to swallow sound whole. Linda found herself speaking louder than necessary, as if to fill the void, or perhaps to assure herself that she was still indeed alone, and not part of Daniel's living gallery of ghastly delights. With a deep breath that did little to steady her nerves, Linda moved to the last painting in today's lineup of horrors. Titled Soul's Abyss, it was different from the others. larger, darker, with depths that seemed to pull the gaze inward. The paint was applied so thickly, it almost seemed to pulse. As she stared, the abstract mess transformed, and she could swear she saw a figure reaching out, as if trying to escape the canvas itself. "Now we're getting a bit too literal with the whole art coming to life thing," she said to the empty room, trying to laugh it off. Yet, the uneasy feeling remained, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach that no amount of humorous deflection could untie. Linda couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't just paintings. They were messages, maybe even warnings. Each canvas seemed less like a product of Daniel's imagination and more like a window into a troubled, perhaps even tormented soul. Was he channeling something through these chaotic scenes? Or was she merely projecting her own fears onto his art? The gallery's phone rang, cutting through her musings like a scream in the night. Linda jumped, heart racing as she reached for the receiver. The voice on the other end was Daniel's, calm and familiar, yet it sent a chill down her spine as he asked, "So, how's everything at the gallery? Anything interesting happened today?" "Oh, nothing much," Linda replied, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Just your usual gallery ghost stories, you know." But as she hung up, the words echoed in her mind, heavy with implications she wasn't sure she wanted to explore. What if Daniel's art was more than just paint on canvas? What if it was a reflection, a shadow of something real and terrifying? With that chilling thought, Linda decided it was time to confront Daniel, to seek answers to questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. But first, she needed to inspect one last painting, the one she had avoided all evening, fearing what it might reveal. Linda stood before the final painting, the one she had deliberately ignored all evening. It hung there, unassuming yet ominous, like the last piece of cake at a birthday party that everyone is too polite, or perhaps too wary to eat. The title of the piece, Requiem for the Forgotten, was written in Daniel's looping dramatic script on a small plaque that might as well have said, "Here be dragons." She took a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of oil paint and foreboding, and approached the canvas. The painting was a riot of dark colors, with strokes that swirled and clashed on the canvas like a visual representation of a nightmare about falling. Or was it flying? From a distance, the shapes were indistinct, but as Linda removed her glasses, the blurred lines began to coalesce into a distinctly human shape, twisted in anguish or perhaps dancing. It was hard to tell, and that ambiguity sent a shiver down her spine. "Nice, Daniel," Linda murmured, the words a lifeline thrown to her wavering courage. "Your art's turned from abstract to abstract horror. What's next? A series on the existential dread of Laundry Day." But her attempt at humor fell flat in the silent gallery, absorbed by the thick, expectant air. She squinted, trying to unsee the figure, but it was too late. The image was burned into her mind's eye, as if Daniel had managed to paint directly on the inside of her eyelids. The studio's phone rang again, slicing through the quiet like a knife through canvas. Linda jumped, a testament to her frayed nerves. She answered mechanically, her voice hollow. It was Daniel again, his tone casual, almost too casual. "Just checking in again, love. You didn't sound yourself earlier. Everything all right?" Linda glanced back at the unsettling tableau of paintings. "Oh, everything's just peachy," she replied, her tone dripping with more sarcasm than a teenage drama queen. "I'm just having a tea party with your ghoulish little friends here. We're discussing the finer points of spectral aesthetics." Daniel laughed, but Linda could hear the underlying note of confusion. "You always did have a way with words, Linda. I'll be home soon. We'll talk then." "Can't wait," Linda said dryly, hanging up with a click that sounded ominously final. She turned back to the painting, her resolve hardening. Whatever Daniel was hiding in these paintings, whatever secrets or sorrows were embedded in the layers of paint, she needed to know. It was no longer just a matter of unsettling art. It felt personal, a hidden message in every stroke. With a newfound determination, Linda decided it was time for some answers. She needed to understand the man she lived with, the mind behind the madness of his creations. Was he a tortured artist? Or was there something more sinister at play? The answers, she feared, might be hidden in his private studio at home, a place she had rarely ventured into, a room always locked, its contents as mysterious as the man himself. As the gallery's lights dimmed with the setting sun, casting long shadows that danced eerily against the walls, Linda prepared to leave. She wasn't just locking up the gallery for the night, she was locking away the doubts that had plagued her. Tomorrow she would confront Daniel, ready to face whatever truths lay hidden beneath the surface of his art. "Ready or not, here I come," she whispered to the empty room, a grim smile playing on her lips as she stepped out into the cooling twilight, the door closing with a resolute thud behind her. The drive home was a tapestry of flickering streetlights and the soft hum of the car's engine, the familiar route taking on a surreal quality as Linda replayed the evening's discoveries in her mind. Each traffic light seemed to glare at her like the ominous eyes of the paintings, watching her every move, judging her slow piecing together of the puzzle. When she finally arrived, the house was dark, Daniel's studio silhouetted against the moonlit sky like a scene from a Gothic novel. Linda's heart pounded as she approached the door to the studio, Daniel's sanctum, the heart of all his artistic endeavors and, perhaps, his secrets. The key turned in the lock with an ominous click, louder in the silent house than she had expected. The room was shrouded in shadows, the faint moonlight filtering through a small window casting ghostly patterns on the floor. Linda reached for the light switch, her fingers trembling slightly. As the room flooded with light, her eyes were drawn immediately to the easel in the center of the room. There, an unfinished painting waited, its details obscured by the distance. With each step closer, the image became clearer, and Linda's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't abstract, it was different from all the others. It was a portrait, stark and unflinching, and unmistakably, it was of her. But not just any portrait. This one had an intensity, a raw emotion that she had never seen in Daniel's work before. The brushstrokes were wild, desperate, as if capturing not just her likeness, but her essence, her soul. "Why, Daniel?" she whispered into the stillness, the question hanging in the air, unanswered. She felt a mix of fear and fascination, the realization dawning on her that there was more to Daniel than she had ever known. His art wasn't just a profession, it was a confession, a silent scream into the void of his own mind. As she stood there, the pieces clicked into place, a mosaic of pain and beauty, chaos and order, hidden beneath the surface of every canvas. Daniel's art was his diary, his legacy, each painting a chapter, each brush stroke a word left unspoken. The door creaked behind her and she turned to see Daniel standing there, his expression unreadable. "You found them," he said simply, his voice soft. "I found you," Linda replied, holding his gaze. "Now let's really talk." The conversation that night was long and winding, a journey through Daniel's past, his fears, his dreams. It was a revelation, a breaking and mending of bonds through the shared language of his art. And so, dear listeners, what do you think was really happening in Daniel's paintings? Was it merely the abstract expressions of a tortured artist? Or something deeper, a cry for help, a hidden message waiting to be discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this spine-tingling tale and want more, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Dive into the discussion, and perhaps share your own experiences with the mysteries hidden in plain sight. Stay tuned, and remember, sometimes the truth is only a brushstroke away.